586, entitled Games as a Generation. So to start, this CWA session will use both the CWA app and a note card system to receive questions from the audience. To ask a question in the app, simply select the session and schedule, tap Q&A, and then insert and send your question to me, and it will be appearing on my laptop. The app will receive your questions starting now. You may also raise your hand to request a note card and pencil from one of our lovely producers. If you opt for this mode, you must write legibly. If you are a student, please note this in your question either on the app or on the card. And if you're watching the session remotely, please share your location with us and please make your questions brief and to the point. We have these fantastic new panelists with a whole lot of information and stuff to share, so we want to get through as much of it as possible. To start, my name is Nick. I'm the Director of Events for the CU Gaming organization on campus. We're a student organization that prioritizes on building the community around gaming here on campus. And I will now pass it off to JP. He is one of the people at Microsoft doing very interesting work. JP, if you want to share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So, hi everyone, my name is JP. Currently working in Microsoft in the education division, covering 33 countries in Central and Eastern Europe. Besides that, we also co-founded a cybersecurity company that basically gets other companies to hire us to hack into their networks and then tell them how we did it and how to secure themselves. Actually, video games are a close topic to me because at 10 years old, my first business was illegally downloading video games, burning them on CD-ROMs, and then selling them at our school because we couldn't really afford to buy new games. So yeah, that was a fun experience. And yeah, I only stopped because one of my classmates said that they would call the police. And I just had this vision of FBI knocking my door down, arresting me having to explain to my parents. So that's how this business venture stopped.
Awesome. JP, real quick, what's your favorite game to play?
So my favorite game would be either Grand Theft Auto or Assassin's Creed.
Awesome. All right, next up we have Nancy. She is one of the developers working on AWS. For those of you who do not know, that is Amazon Web Systems.
Close. Services.
Services.
It's okay. We power a bunch of systems, so that would be.
I just know it colloquially as AWS, and that's what I consider this. So.
Oh, yeah, and definitely put me next to the Microsoft guy. So, with that said, definitely, I was actually just playing Assassin's Creed 2 3 weeks ago, so great throwback. So a little bit about me, as Nick kindly introduced. I'm actually a managed developers. I'm now in a general management role. So with that said, I leave the coding and the production code writing to more qualified people these days. But with that said, where I focus on is actually thinking about gaming servers and how to power the infrastructure platform behind making sure that, let's say, frames don't get dropped, right? And let's say you're playing a multiplayer, massively online game, right, where you have multiple players all around the globe sending, multiple, let's say, signals or acts, right, through the network, at milliseconds level. How do we guarantee that throughput and uptime for businesses? So that's partly what I focus on. Gaming just happens to be one of my verticals. Also, we support healthcare, media entertainment, financial services, so on and so forth. And one other topic I'm super excited to also participate in is women in gaming. So one of, Kate and I, Kate in the audience here, are part of a nonprofit organization called Advancing Women in Tech. And part of our community is also women gamers. So women who work on building games, designing games, as well as professional gaming.
Cool. And very finally, we have Emma Niedell. She is the director of a pretty famous movie, and I'll let her tell you all about it.
Thank you for the introduction. So my name is Emma Niedell. I'm a filmmaker. The movie that Nick referenced is called Waterman, and was made in a traditional filmmaking way, right? Where you have your actors, you have your live action location. Very traditional in terms of filmmaking, but where I believe it makes sense for me to be on this panel is my next filmmaking endeavor, which uses virtual production. Virtual production is a game changer. It's already making huge waves in Hollywood, and it's going to continue to do so. And frankly, I believe it's the future of filmmaking. But what it uses in order to create, the new kind of cinematic images we're seeing, it uses game engine technology. So this program, Unreal Engine. And Unreal Engine was used to make, amazing games, including most famously Fortnite, but also Far Cry 6 and probably some other ones, maybe Nick, that you could even reference. But it's an amazing technology which basically uses real-time rendering. So, if you think of a good example is a Pixar film or even a Marvel film, a lot of Marvel films are filmed using a green screen for these big kind of action sequences. So the actors have to think about, imagine, act, what could be happening on the green screen, eventually rendered through post. And the cinematographer also has to think about, I have to use my imagination to think about what the scene will look like, even though I'm seeing this big, obnoxious green screen in front of me on the camera right now. What virtual production does is it uses a bunch of LED panels that are put together, sort of like it's a green screen, but an Unreal Engine made scene can be played on these LED panels. And so suddenly the actors can see the actual set that they're in, whether it's an alien landscape or, a buildings that are falling down in an earthquake, whatever the scene is. The actors can see it and react to that, and the cinematographer can also see it. It also just saves on filming on location. You can have a scene, you can film in Paris in the morning and in a rainforest in the afternoon, all while staying in your set without any disruption also to the environment, which is something I'm really passionate about as well. And then finally, the games I love. I grew up playing The Sims. As a Coloradan, native Coloradan, I have to give a shout out to Red Dead Redemption. And then currently I'm playing It Takes Two.
Awesome. So I guess one additional note about the virtual production is it finally means we can use the colors green and blue at the same time.
Yeah.
To touch a little bit more about the virtual production, both Emma and Nancy, because I imagine this also has to do with some possibly routing through AWS servers to get kind of things interconnected. One of the major things that people will probably recognize as being done by this virtual production is The Mandalorian. Almost all of that is done on the real stage. Can you share a little bit about how Unreal Engine has shaped that a little bit more, and what is probably one of the coolest things we can do with Unreal Engine, both either in-game or in the film production?
Yeah, so Mandalorian is probably the most famous case study and piece of content using virtual production. And it was actually made before Unreal Engine had a real foothold across the industry. And Mandalorian was sort of the flagship example of this is what virtual production can do, right? And, for those of you who have seen The Mandalorian, you know how, awe-inspiring those vistas and those sets are. Even the interiors are all made using virtual production, which is insane if you think about it. But what's really interesting about The Mandalorian and why it was able to be used, I think, is in large part because of the genre. It's a Western. So for those of you who haven't seen The Mandalorian, it's this kind of sci-fi Western, starring a character from Star Wars, kind of going on this quest across all these different alien planets. And so every single alien planet was made using Unreal Engine. Again, a game engine used, where I think even Red Dead Redemption was made using Unreal Engine. So game engine technology, but the fidelity and quality is so high that it looks like a real set. So you get these epic vistas. But I think in large part it worked because of the Western genre, where you can get these kind of sweeping wide shots and these that really kind of play to the strengths of virtual production, where it's impossible or at least really difficult to get a character to walk from really far in the background toward camera because you're limited by a stage. So I think one thing that Mandalorian did really well is embrace the genre and the technology to accomplish their vision. But at the same time, Mandalorian was stupid expensive and a real limiter for indie productions who didn't have $15 million in their budget. But now what Unreal Engine is doing, and this is definitely why I was able to do the project I'm doing, they really wanted to start giving these tools to indie filmmakers. How can we bring down the cost so it actually, when you're trying to pitch a project as an indie filmmaker, Unreal Engine stops becoming a bit of a barrier and actually opens doors for new content and new filmmakers who would otherwise be kind of boxed out of making their projects.
So Nancy, one of the things that happened right as the pandemic was going on, 2020, League of Legends Worlds Finals. Now, I am a amateur broadcast engineer, and so when I saw some of the workflows that the production teams had done for that event, a lot of that was piping vMix through AWS. Did you have, or did you know about any of that, or?
Yeah, so there's a sister team in my organization that works on a lot of the technologies that Emma just referenced. One of our game engines that we recently open sourced is AWS Lumberyard, which is designed to provide very low latency, high degree of fidelity rendering for gamers. The areas that I specifically focus on is if you think about, again, back to the scenario where you have a league of players, right, who may be situated all around the world, especially during COVID times, this was certainly the case, right? They're communicating to each other, they're sending each other messages, right? They're collaborating on these sort of team efforts, within these games. Right, specifically on Fortnite, which is completely hosted on AWS EC2, right, you have to think about, for that game alone, right, let's say a player's in Korea and the other player's in Canada, for example, how do you actually load balance all of that compute that you need to power for that game engine? Because there's, frankly, also a ton of other customers, right, that AWS serves, right? So how do you guarantee that you have the necessary capacity, right, through all of the regions that AWS operates? So it's a constant sort of optimization and capacity question that we have many teams working on.
Cool. Open question to anyone who wants to answer first. How do you guys think the technical developments of technology, obviously, has influenced gaming, and how has that really influenced the culture of games and as a whole?
I think we haven't heard from Jenny in a while, so.
So what was strange for me is like when I was in primary school, so a couple of years ago, it was like gaming was almost the taboo topic. So there was a couple of us geeks that were playing games, and like it wasn't something that you would openly share with everyone because the majority of people didn't play anything, and like you were the weird guy locked in the basement in the darkness playing games, right? And then after I finished school and like a couple of years later, I was running a workshop at one of the high schools, and the most profound thing ever happened. Like there was a group of these three athletes, like jocks, the people that in my time at high school would never be interested in anything related to computers. And they weren't talking about sports. They were talking about which game they're going to play next and how long they were playing and like who killed who in which game and so on. And it was just so weird for me to see that slowly but surely it's becoming very much mainstream. And I would even say like who in the audience who considers themselves as a gamer? If I can see some hands. Okay, and then if we would do another one, who has at least one game installed on their mobile phone? Yeah, so see, this is something that's also interesting what's happening, and that is that if gaming used to be something that was only considered either on a computer or on a console, now actually the majority of revenue is being generated through mobile gaming. And so in North America, that's about $25 billion every single year, just from mobile gaming. So to maybe wrap it up, I think technological development in one way, like the hardware became a bit cheaper. Well, not now because of the video card like scarcity, but otherwise it became a bit cheaper. It became, I would say, normal, quotation marks, normal to play games, and also it became more accessible. And so it also became cheaper. So for example, with Steam, the online store, like the only reason why I mentioned before that I was pirating games and like selling them was because a new game would cost 50 euros and then I could download it from torrents and it was free, right? Or sell it for, I don't know, 10 or 20 euros, so it was much more accessible. Now with Steam and with the majority of sales, like video game sales being done through online platforms, so it's become cheaper. And like Steam as a store, they have like flash deals, they have, special events and so on, and all of a sudden, a game that would cost, 50 euros or dollars, now costs, let's say, $5 because there's a special promotion and you can download it. So it's become much more accessible. And I have some friends that have like 200 games that they bought in their Steam library, which is probably more than they will ever be able to play. But just because there's so many promotions and packs and so on, they're just kind of accumulating. And then now they have a problem that they have 200 games, but nothing to play.
Awesome. Nancy, you wanna?
Sure. So maybe providing a different perspective. So one of my best friends, she lives in San Francisco. She's the director of product for Jam City, which is the producer for Candy Crush. And before that, she worked at Zynga. So I hear a lot of her tales around signing games for a term called casual gamers. Right? I'm not a gamer. I'm just going to be upfront about that. But sometimes it can be a casual game. Right? You pull out, let's say, Farmville, which took the world by storm. You pull out Plants Against Zombies, which is one of my favorite games, right? As I sit on airplanes, or games like Candy Crush. And so that caters to sometimes a completely different audience of folks who may not have, let's say, the time to dedicate sitting in front of a PC playing, games for hours, but sometimes they can dedicate maybe 10, 15, 30 minutes, right? And I'd even put Wordle, right, which is, I'm sure a lot of us have engaged with that, as a casual game as well, right? There's definitely that release of dopamine, serotonin when you achieve to that next level, right? When you solve that puzzle. And that's one thing that my friend Jenny tells me a lot is when she thinks about designing casual games, right? It's all about that quick hits, right? When you get a puzzle solved in Candy Crush, right? Where you get more gems as a result, or in Farmville where you get more livestock, right? That plays with brain chemistry in a way that, hey, you gotta win, right? And that's really what the casual gamers go after. So it's a completely different paradigm, but also one that's very fascinating.
I'm also a casual gamer. I want to be upfront about that. And what definitely has intrigued me over the years as someone who loves cinema is how cinematic games have become. But I also think, especially during the pandemic, I started playing a lot more games. I started playing a lot more games because I could interact with real people. It definitely came out of me feeling really lonely. And I went to a few concerts in Fortnite, which at first I was like, okay, why not? We're in quarantine. This will be interesting. And I had so much fun. It felt like going, not the full concert experience, but being around other real people, other real players, and seeing, credit to Fortnite here, the Travis Scott concert was incredible. They had a moment where they turned off gravity and your little avatar was suddenly flying through the air looking at a massive Travis Scott performing. And I believe he was performing live too, right? Which is nuts. So you're actually seeing a real concert. And so that for me changed. It opened up gaming in a whole new way where it became social and it became a way to connect with real people. And I think, that probably has a lot to do with the web cloud services and increasing technology. But for someone like me and for a lot of people, it became a way to feel a little less lonely.
Awesome.
Yeah, and actually one fun fact, sorry if I may.
Oh yeah.
Don't want to hog, but actually when I was talking to Stuart Butterfield, who's the CEO of Slack, that's actually was Slack's original origins. Is they started as a messaging platform for gamers, and then they were like, oh wow, this is a great thing that could be a communication platform for everybody. And I'm an avid Slack user. I think many of us here are, right? So gaming has also created this community where a lot of innovations have also happened.
Yeah, definitely. So, given the financial incentive of phone apps and games to keep users engaged, what do you think the propensity of children's apps to be used as educational, and are they beneficial?
Yeah, for sure. So there is a trap with mobile games, so called microtransactions, and there's been stories with people not even realizing that they spent like hundreds of dollars because it was just like 99 cents there, 99 cents there, and so on. And then at the end of the month, the credit card bill came and it was, $250. So in regards to that, I think the microtransaction should be removed from any kind of child apps and so on. But yeah, what's interesting seeing is that now people are catching on that gamification is a real thing, that it can be used in education, right? So all of a sudden, you can make any kind of content more interesting, more even even make it easier and more pleasurable to learn, just if you make some adjustments in terms of gamification. So basically, gamification means taking something and then kind of envisioning it as a game. So for example, instead of having a math quiz that would have 10 questions, you could be, for example, I don't know, level 1, you answer the easy one, and then you answer the question, it's correct, and you get some experience points, for example, and you get a new question and so on. So pretty much all of the games kind of have those mechanics in them, but now it's becoming more and more popular to kind of integrate that mechanics into other apps and into education as well. So another good example here is also Minecraft. So Minecraft is all the rage, especially with like more younger kids. There's actually a special version called Minecraft Education Edition, and it's basically pre-built to be used in a classroom. So there's been great examples of like coding lessons for primary high school students done entirely through Minecraft. So you have this avatar, you walk through, and then basically you learn coding by, I don't know, smashing some rocks and then climbing somewhere and so on and so on. And it's been shown to be really beneficial and really make it easier to learn through a system like that. And then, for example, there's also been during the pandemic, some countries actually digitalized for example, their capital cities. And so when students were learning about the history, because it was all done remotely and because no one was allowed to go outside and kind of go into the museums, so some countries actually had digital version of their capital city. So what the teacher would do is just invite all of the students into this Minecraft world, and they would walk through the city together during the pandemic, and then there would be, I don't know, all of the statues on all of the monuments, all of the attractions, and they would slowly go through and they would basically have a history lesson done through a video game. And that's becoming more and more popular. Another good example is also, there's at least in Europe, we have the European Day of Safe Internet Usage. And so, again, countries have started, instead of having a boring presentation of a teacher going, you should use safe passwords, you should not talk to strangers, you should do this, and then just kind of going through slides, they actually build Minecraft worlds where you walk through, and then you have quizzes like, I don't know, is it safe to share your address on the internet, for example? And then there was like switches, and you would say, for example, yes, and then a door would lock and it would say, no, it's not safe to do that, please try again, for example. And then you would get another question again, you would hit the switch, and if you did it correctly, the door would open and you can pass and so on. And like, just seeing the impact, first off, no one fell asleep, right? As opposed to the teacher just boringly presenting how you should be safe on the internet. And on the other hand, there's actually been some statistics happening that the retention of that knowledge is much better on the long term, because it wasn't just them listening to a teacher, but it was actually, what's the English word for it? So like learning by experience, right? And this is something that's easy to do through video games and through like specialized software and so on.
Awesome. Does anyone else want to input on this?
Yeah, maybe I'll just take that even a bit broader, right? Is as someone who has used Weight Watchers, for example, right, which counts food you eat via points, or even language apps like Duolingo, I think it's really interesting. And I often listen to this podcast series by Professor Huberman from Stanford. Right? He runs Huberman Live. He talks about like really how incentives and the brain chemistry work. Right? Why we're excited about, hey, we're in the middle of a game, let's say, right? And we're getting to the next level, or we just killed, the bad character, right? And we moved on. Right? That's great. And that's really where we feel that hit of joy. And I have to be the first to admit that I'm not innocent to using some of these tactics in my own team. So for example, I often ask my engineers to do demos. Why? Because it's a good way for them to demonstrate, hey, this is what I built over the last sprint or 2 sprints. Plus, it also builds their confidence, right, into public speaking. But often, if I just say, hey, everybody, it's good for you, right, let's sign up, I get maybe 2 signups out of 5. But last month, I tried a new tactic, which is, hey, if you sign up, we'll do a random drawing. You're going to get a $25 Amazon gift card and a t-shirt, right? We got 20 signups. So it just shows how gamification through a lot of aspects of our life, whether it's management, work, or even how you manage your weight, for example, right? It's really kind of taking advantage of how our brains work and respond to stimulus.
I don't know if I have anything eloquent to say about education necessarily.
That's absolutely fine. So, what do you think games do for individuals? Either talking about the positives or the negatives. Do you think it disconnects us from reality, or do you think it creates a new form of social reality?
So in a way, it can be both. So for example, I had some friends that I would say got, pretty much addicted to video games, and that was showing in ways that they were like actually locked in their basements playing 24/7 and just like going to sleep when they could no longer function. That's the end of it. But on the other hand, so like I've read some really interesting studies, for example, where they took shooting games and they got elderly people in retirement homes to play them. And they were tracking their brain activity, they were tracking then like what the effect was. And what it showed was that like the grandpa and grandma playing shooting games and like really trying to tactilize and then like be careful and shoot and have reflexes and so on. In just a couple of weeks, they could already see the improvement on their cognitive levels. And also like it was then demonstrated that on the even longer term, this would even be help to kind of slow down the progression of any kind of Alzheimer's or dementia or something like that. And like they got better reaction times because they got used to the games where you have to be like fast and you have to react and so on. They got better eye-hand coordination and so on. So there's honestly a lot of positive experiences as well. And also like there's just having people connecting and like playing together. So one of my first experiences of experiencing new cultures were through online games. So that was when I was, 10 years old. We didn't really travel that far. And then all of a sudden, like being in a team with a person from America, with a person from the Philippines, and also Germany and Italy, for example, it was such a mixed bag of everything. And also I think it really helped me learn English at the time. Because then you have to communicate, you have to either type or you have to speak and so on. So I would say there's a whole bunch of positive effects. Now, on the other hand, it's also being shown that there's some longer term issues that are going to happen with, for example, the kids that are now playing, like I would say very small kids, like 2, 3, 4 years, something like that, where basically they're given a phone or a tablet just to shut up and be calm behind the table, right, when the family is eating. So there's actually been shown that there's also a too young to play video games age, because then as opposed to getting like the awesome hand-eye coordination and so on, they're actually getting lower attention spans. And honestly, it's been shown that it's also harming the socializing aspect of those kids, because we talked before, dopamine hits. So if they start getting those small dopamine hits when they are 3 years old, then kind of their brain adapts to, if it's difficult, I'm just going to bury myself in here and kind of avoid the reality and everything. So yeah, I think we're still far from first off knowing what the actual negative consequences will be and what the age of when it's appropriate to give a phone or a tablet or so on would be for a child. And it's actually interesting that when you talk to the Silicon Valley executives, like most of them would say, I do not allow my kids to have phones. I do not allow my kids to use the computer. And they would say, I don't know, my kid is 12 years old and they are getting their first phone next year, for example. Yeah. So it's interesting, right? The people who basically built all of those systems, who built the constant push of dopamine that we are getting every single day, they know what they are doing and they are limiting the same technology that they are building for their children. So I think that's also an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I think it can be summarized in everything in moderation. Just like I love sweets, so probably eating an entire cake would not be good for me. That's awesome that sounds right now. Right, so from that perspective, and to your point around tech execs themselves not letting their children or their nieces play with tablets or engage with computers super early on, I think it comes down to what controls are you setting as a parent or a guardian? Right? How many hours of screen time? What do you allow them to see? Right? The good news is, at this day and age, there's so many different MDMs, for example, mobile device management apps, that can block certain apps from your children as long as they log on through their profiles, for example, or browser, for example, filters, right? That filters specific websites from being accessed by your kids. So if you have the foresight to set up those controls and parameters, I think you could provide a very good experience. With that said, I think most of I would say a lot of learning that happens these days is around social interactions. To your point, because we've been stuck in the last 2 years where students couldn't go out in this playground, right, play with each other because of the pandemic. A lot of the interaction now occurs online, right? So I often chat with educators and primary school teachers about what is a safe environment, what is a safe experience now that most students in public schools are given a Chromebook, right? And is that Chromebook being set up so that they can only access certain websites or all websites? So it creates a lot of questions around controls, around ethics, right? Around how do you want the next generation to think about technology?
I have a lovely relationship with gaming. One of the reasons why it is love is because of the escapism I feel, especially playing. I fell in love with Red Dead Redemption 2 over the pandemic, and in a time when I couldn't explore physically, I could explore this amazing world of the West at home. The hate side of it, I have a fiance who's a huge gamer, huge gamer, and he can get lost in it. And it took a long time for me to recognize it wasn't an addiction, but actually how he interacts with a lot of his friends. And those friends are located all over the globe. And, from a philosophical standpoint, seeing kind of the future we're entering, right, which is very different than the kind of past and present that we're used to, where we have things like airplanes that can get us across the world in half a day. That's probably that technology will probably be limited soon, and should be, because of all the greenhouse gas emissions. But now we have the technology to interface and to build friendships and relationships with people who live across the world. And I think that's a huge positive for gaming. As a storyteller, first and foremost, I always try and think about the premise in every film or book or TV show that I'm working on. What is the point? What is the fundamental essence of this story? Sometimes it's considered the theme. It's a universal human experience that can make people feel. It's a really powerful tool for storytelling. But often stories with film and TV and books are through one hero's perspective, through a hero's journey. And I've recently had the opportunity to work on an open world game. And I still came at it through that approach as a storyteller with a theme and a premise. But instead of having one character make all the choices, the world I built was constructed to give people, different players, choice in that world. So still centered around a theme I really believe passionately about. And in this case, it actually was about greed and power in an environmental situation, which will be really interesting to see how that plays out when you give people, access to that. But so as a storyteller, I think gaming opens up a whole new world where you can divorce storytelling from the hero's perspective, and have people engage with the world you're building all around a certain theme. So I feel a lot of hope for it now. And my hope too is there can be positive friendships that are built that don't come at the cost of real life, human to human interaction.
To kind of springboard off of that, the evolution of storytelling in the medium of video games, kind of what's your perspective on that, and how do you think that's evolved?
The way I started to understand it really was through experiences in virtual reality, where, when you go to a traditional movie theater, you sit down to watch a television show, you are watching everything scripted beforehand, right? And you are not active in the story at all. You are, as the VR jargon goes, you are a passive participant or a passive observer. And the few VR projects that I saw, which really impacted me, I was not a passive observer, I was an active participant making choices in this world. And in a video game, because you don't have to worry about the 360 view, you can do so much more. when it comes to world building choice. And you can have things like, oh my gosh, I'm spacing on the word, but generative environments. Procedural generation, right? Where worlds can load as you start to become near them. And frankly, it was 2 video games that really opened my eyes to storytelling in video games. One is Last of Us. For those of you who don't know, Last of Us is pretty groundbreaking when it comes to storytelling, and in particular the second one, where I hope I don't spoil it, but I'm going to spoil it because it's worth knowing this. Oh, you haven't played it yet?
I'm not. It's on my list. It's loaded down at home.
What I'll say is it did something pretty fundamental when it came to character. You play the game through the point of view of one character, and it's something pretty fundamental that I've never seen happen in a video game happen, where you have your perspective shift in a really profound way. I'm not going to say any more because I won't spoil it for you, but that totally changed the game for me of what a video game can do. But again, you're through the eyes of one character. So I think, anytime in the same way, you can learn something by a teacher telling you something. You can feel and learn something by watching a film, a really good film. But I think when you experience it firsthand and you empathize with the character, not only because they're a compelling character in a compelling situation, but because you're making the choice for what they're doing, I think it has a greater impact because you're involved in the decision making.
The way you just described that fundamental change, I feel like I need to play it as well.
There's a great YouTube video such as that also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what are some of your thoughts on the metaverse and VR as it evolves? Will we be living in a Ready Player One type of society anytime soon?
So, the more I talk to people about the metaverse, the more I get the answer that everyone's weirded out about it. Like even the biggest gamers in my friend group, they just, I don't know, they seem spooked, they don't seem interested. And honestly, like from a lot of conversations that I had, the only people that seem excited seem to be like businesses, and they seem to be saying that we'll be living in the metaverse, we'll be doing meetings there and so on. But at the same time, we just went through a pandemic, and I think that even the people that liked being more introverted and like non-interactive people now kind of crave the human contact. So I think the timing might be a bit off. I mean, time will show, and it's a powerful technology. We'll see what happens. But yeah, so far I haven't really seen any excitement from end users. A lot of excitement from businesses, like pretty much every single company is going on about the metaverse right now. But from the actual end users, everyone just kind of meh, like they don't really see it. So yeah, it'll be exciting to see what happens. But I think VR is kind of the step in between, which is gaining popularity and is becoming more accessible, because all of a sudden you no longer need to spend like thousands of dollars to buy equipment to be able to do something. The VR is becoming cheaper, and like we had this interesting project in Slovenia. There was a company that was building airplane simulators. So basically what they did is they made a replica of the cockpit of one of the smaller planes, and with all the controls and everything. And then what you did is you would sit down, you would put on a VR headset, and then you would start flying. And like that was my kind of aha moment, seeing the power of VR, because then like I was flying the plane, and I played the flight simulator games before, right? And it was on my keyboard, and it was awkward, and it was hard to kind of balance the plane and not crash it. But there I was like actually holding the stick and everything and flying, and then I decided I'm just going to do like a loop, right? It's a game, I can do whatever. So I started doing that, and like a part of me, I had this sinking feeling in my stomach. And just like knowing that I can experience that through VR, knowing that I'm sitting still in a cockpit, it's safe, like nothing will happen, I can do whatever I want, I won't fall out. And then yeah, just doing that loop and having the sinking feeling. And then as I was playing some more, I decided I'm going to try to land. And so I was trying to land, and I felt this anxiety building up because I was getting closer and closer, and still the plane was shaking and everything. Again, it's a game. I knew it was not really a game, a simulator. I knew it wasn't real, But then, like when I was going down too fast, I just felt this fear building up, and then I crashed, of course, because I don't know how to land. But I crashed, and there was a part of me that was actually scared about me crashing the plane. So that was kind of the whoa, like what can we do with this? And another one that's also a super cool project, if you ask me, is there's a startup that basically goes to different locations, and then they feel kind of like walkthroughs in 3D, so that people can then wear the VR headset and they can kind of experience it. And what's interesting is that the main customer base for them, or user base for them, were people who have any kind of disability where they cannot move. So, for example, they started pairing up with an NGO that works with people who are quadriplegic, so basically they cannot feel anything from the neck down, and they start giving them the VR headset so that they could basically walk through some I don't know, hiking trails or some monuments and so on. And again, like they were then tracking the overall well-being of those people, and they saw an improvement because then all of a sudden someone was basically bound to a chair and they cannot move. They got to experience and they got to walk through some of the most famous landmarks and so on. So I think those are kind of the use cases that people, including myself, would never think about, that this is something that the technology could be used for. And I think we'll see more and more of that pretty soon. As for metaverse, I guess wait and see, but so far it seems a bit awkward.
I'm glad we have different perspectives, and I'm probably somewhere in the middle, to be fair, right? You sound like you're more on the skeptic side. I'm certainly not a gung-ho, we're all in. But certainly speaking from a business perspective. So in addition to my work with Amazon, I also am an active angel investor, and I work with venture capital firms. I meet with founders on a regular basis. And what I can say is pre-pandemic, all meetings happened in person. So you had to be on Sand Hill, and founders came to you. They flew in from New York, from LA, from SF, various places, right? And you would travel for hours on end, right, for a 45-minute meeting. And sure, if that meeting went well, they would then meet the partnership for another hour, right? But the ROI was quite low. And these days, my new policy is I really take the first meeting virtually, right, on Zoom, which means that for all of these founders, they get a first sort of assessment, whether it's a good idea, whether it's an idea that maybe is not a good fit for what I invest in, so on and so forth, right? And they don't have to necessarily invest all of that time into travel and logistics. So I say that because I see that as one of the advances, right, behind virtual meetings, which really has a future intersection with the metaverse, right? Making interactions, making community social interactions as realistic as possible. So that in the future, and we're already seeing this with work, right? We're never going to go back, and I'll be the first to say this, right? I don't want to be in an office 5 days a week, right? Where I sit in front of my computer for 12 hours a day, right? Why? Because I can't run errands that way, right? I can't, do the things that I need to do as sort of my individual life, right? And so we're always going to have this hybrid split of maybe 2 days in the office, maybe 3. Some companies have different policies, right? But with that said, the days that we're not spending in the office doing live whiteboarding or live interaction, we could leverage some of these new technologies. I mean, Zoom has gotten so much better since when it first came out, right? And I'm sure that it's still going to continue getting better, right? These days we have facial recognition where, depending on who's speaking in the room, right, that camera will shift towards that person. So it brings out individuals who tend to be more introverted, right? They may not want the spotlight. And in a way, I actually think that it serves to equalize, right, the playing field for folks in the workplace, because you don't necessarily need to be that super loud, very brash, right, shiny personality in order to be recognized for your achievements.
Sometimes when people talk about the metaverse, it's this fear, we're all going to live online. And I sort of feel like, well, that's kind of true already, right? Like there's so much already that happens online. And you look at sort of my generation or younger, I'm millennial, right? So Gen Z. So much of our social lives, school lives, work lives are already happening online. Our online footprint, who we are on social media, et cetera, is a huge part of our actual core identity. So in that way, in some way I feel like it's already here or it's inevitable. But the way I've understood the metaverse from the business side, the businesses I've spoken to, one example is, I think Sony's working on their version of the metaverse, right? Every company's working on their version of the metaverse. And what I've come to, the best I understand of it is that it turns the internet into a spatial geographical plane where you can buy real estate in the metaverse to be closer to certain hotspots, digital hotspots. So let's say there's a concert happening in the metaverse, right? Now we'll use Billie Eilish. Billie Eilish is having a concert in the metaverse. Depending on your plot of land in the metaverse, you get priority access or faster access because you've paid more money to be closer to the concert hall. I have so many thoughts on this. Obviously, as a storyteller, as a huge Ready Player One fan of the book and reluctantly the movie.
Reluctantly.
The book was so good. It should have been a TV show. That's a whole other panel. I do see the dystopian perspective on this, where it's like, just like now, where home ownership and actually owning real estate is, there's so many of us, myself included, who are iced out from that, certainly in a city like Los Angeles, where Hollywood's located. To think about, now the internet is going to ice out those of us who can't afford a digital plot of land, how freaking depressing. So I think there's a lot about the metaverse that really bums me out when I think about it in the sense of buying digital plots of land for faster access. At the same time, not to go too deep down this wormhole, but with NFTs, right, non-fungible tokens, where you can kind of own a digital character, and I have so many thoughts on this. Once again, a gradient of good and bad. But one thing that is really interesting, and I want to bring this story up, right, and from my perspective in Hollywood. A couple of years ago, the Writers Guild was going through a strike to fight against the studios to get better, especially the streamers, to get better payments, a better payment structure, because it didn't exist really before. And one of the big fights, there's a writer who came in, I'm not going to say any names, but there's a writer who came in who was really devastated. She wrote an original project that was an animated film. The studio owned it and was making a live action version. And she wasn't seeing any money from the from the characters that she invented. While this one company was going to make a lot of money off of her original work. And unfortunately, the way the deal was signed back in the 80s and 90s, there's nothing anyone could do about it. And what is really interesting about NFTs now is that if you own an NFT, for a lot of them, we'll use the famous one, Bored Ape Yacht Club. Let's say you own a Bored Ape, which is in part of this NFT collection. You own everything surrounding that ape. So if you want to go out and make a coffee company with that ape as your logo, it is clear and free for you to use. And I think there's something really exciting from a storyteller perspective where you can buy something and forever own and license that character. There's ownership and creativity now. And I hope, there's so much about the metaverse that is theoretical, that's still being invented, built before our eyes. But my hope is that, it's not just about the wealthy, once again, having ownership over the metaverse, but people who, because they can buy something and because they're creative, they can have a leg up in whatever this new kind of world of creativity and ownership and originality is.
Cool. Good to see a kind of a diverse spread of opinions on the metaverse. I'm glad somebody asked this question because I was going to go into it anyway. What do you think Meta will do with personal information? Do you think they'll control the metaverse, or do you think that control will be kind of decentralized? We all have seen the controversy surrounding Facebook and their use of personal information. So do you think that trend will continue? Do you think it'll change?
Sure. So I'll come at this question from a compliance and regulatory angle. As leader for AWS data protection and governance, that's something we think about on a daily basis. Right? Because, for example, maybe not so much user data. Let's take another scenario, business data. Right? So as you may know, Right? Majority of Fortune 500s and those who are not using AWS today are already in talks with using AWS, are running on AWS. But if you think about all of the verticals where Amazon is present, right, that includes media entertainment, recently acquired MGM Studios, along with which now folds into Amazon Studios and Amazon Prime. We're obviously in the retail business, and Target is a customer, right? So you think along those lines, right? That goes down to there has to be very strict regulations around not sharing data, right? Because once you compromise that trust, right, that trust is intangible, and it's really hard to rebuild that trust. And that's why trust first, everything else second, right? So you have to do what's right by the customer, even if, let's say, customer who happens to be oil and gas on AWS, right, is working on some experiments that could maybe really benefit their consumer business, right? And yet, Amazon might be thinking about starting an oil and gas venture. I'm just making this up, right? And how do you prevent sort of own subsidiaries of a company from using that, right? And that's, I think, very core to your question around how does Meta as a company not leverage personal information for its own gain, right? And we've seen that play out in the Senate before and House hearings that there have been cases that they have. And that goes back to just consumer trust, right? And if you see the trends of just other social media platforms really rising to prominence, including TikTok, Instagram, so on and so forth, right? The usage on Facebook, as we see across all of these platforms, is declining. And one has to wonder, is that correlated then with the loss of trust, right, due to the incidents that have happened over the past 48 months?
Awesome. So to kind of go more into a VR-centric area, do you think there is fear or concerns among developers as they're building more vivid, more realistic games to kind of dissociate reality for its users? And this is a question for the students, so thank you, whoever that was.
Looks like you want it? Go for it.
So I've been listening to the same question for ever since I was 6 years old. Every year there was a news reporter that said the games are becoming so real now, they're becoming so immersive. How will we know what's true and what isn't? And then next year a new game would come out that would be even better than the previous game, and the question would arise again and again and again and again. And then somewhere along that, another question was added, why are video games making children violent, even though all of the studies so far have shown that that's not the case. So I guess part of it is fear, and I definitely understand that with VR, since you're more immersed into the whole experience, that it might be even closer to not being able to differentiate between what's real and what isn't. At the same time, I think you're still wearing a headset, right? You still have to do some preparation to get into that world. It's not like you wake up and you have a screen embedded into your eyes, not knowing what's real and what isn't. So still, there is a bit of a preparation to actually get into the world, and even when you are there, you still feel the headset, and after a while, your eyes will probably start to hurt and so on. So, and also even when you are moving and so on, I don't know. I haven't heard anyone saying yet that they were in the virtual reality world for so long that they couldn't differentiate between what was real and what wasn't. Because at the end of the day, you still know that you are entering something, right? Because we could make the same question for music. If I close my eyes and I have really good headphones, how will I know I'm listening to music and not being there on a live concert, right? Or what if I'm watching a movie and it's so well recorded and so well produced? How will I know I'm not right there with the main character, right? So I think same goes here. We're still smart beings, and I think we can differentiate what's real and what isn't.
That is an incredible perspective on that.
Well said.
Cool. Let's see. So, Emma, how would you explore creating works for different mediums, such as going from screenplay to a novel to virtual production to a video game?
Yeah, there are definitely, when you are approaching a story, the first question you have to ask yourself is, what is this medium? A lot of a lot of projects in Hollywood right now are adaptations, and I think there's a bit of a clean metaphor when it comes to Hollywood. Short films are poems. They're about one simple, beautiful idea. Typically, a character has one fundamental choice in the film that they're making. It's a poem. A feature film is a short story. Again, very concise, about one theme. And all feature films are about one thing fundamentally. And typically, it can be very character-driven, but even if it's character-driven, it's about one idea, one premise. A TV show is like a novel. There are many different characters, there are many different arcs, there are many different themes and ideas explored. But that's typically how I break down when I approach a project, especially for Hollywood. Those kind of three metaphors really help me determine, what is this story really? One thing I think that is seen a lot, especially as the rise of virtual reality has come up, a lot of people will pitch ideas for VR, thinking this would be a great VR project. And typically when that happens, it's very clear who's actually done a lot of VR and who hasn't. It's like, oh, I understand why you might think this is a great VR piece, because there's funding in VR, but this isn't actually a virtual reality piece. This is a great feature film or a great short story or a great short film. So I think you really have to ask yourself when you're approaching a medium, is this the best way to tell the story? And again, using those three metaphors, what really is this?
Awesome. Okay, so I can't exactly read this. Rob, are you here? Just left. Darn it. But the question is more or less as follows. Have you found that gaming can lead to desensitization to violence and maybe an overall loss in balance?
I've also, thanks to fiance who's a huge gamer, I've heard the statistics that JP mentioned. I haven't read those specifically. I think I do wonder what it does, especially to young children, to see violence over and over again, and to be a cause of violence. What I think concerns me most of all in the era of social gaming, especially Twitch, is when people get doxxed or swatted. That's something that really terrifies me, where you can become kind of famous on Twitch as a gamer and build up a real following, or especially this is especially pertinent to women who are gamers. It can still be very misogynistic or sexist. And what has happened, for those of you who don't know doxing and swatting, doxing is where your address and personal details are found out and shared online. And then swatting is when someone calls the police and says, hey, there's this horrible, there's a shooter in this building, here's the address. And it's actually just someone gaming. It's this whole thing, it's this evil fetish, really, where people, while they're live gaming on Twitch, a SWAT team will come in because of this fake 911 call. And it can be incredibly dangerous and, of course, traumatizing for the victims. So I think there's a culture around video games that I've seen, right, from news stories or personal stories shared by victims, where people are targeted because they don't fit whatever mold the typical gamer should be. So it's less about the video games and more about the people who are drawn to violence and human suffering, which isn't indicative of every gamer, but it's definitely a problem that I don't think has been adequately addressed. Yeah.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you. There's a lot of toxic fan bases, especially for gamers, and doxing and swatting does happen. I think that's got more to do with how we are becoming more and more bold on the internet. As soon as you're anonymous, as soon as you're typing and it's not tied to your name, some really nasty stuff can come out. Like, we had a panel yesterday that was moderated by the mayor of Boulder, and he said that as an elected official, the nastiest comments he ever got were always published either anonymously or through a fake profile, right? I think same goes here. Like, people hide behind the anonymity and kind of forget that there's a human on the other end. And it happens on Twitter, it happens on Facebook, not so much on LinkedIn, but it happens pretty much anywhere on any social media. And of course, it also happens on Twitch. maybe I can share here a personal story about desanitization of violence. So I got my first computer when I was 6 years old, and then that would be 2000. And then I started using the internet when I was 7, that was about 2001. And because I got a real passion for computers, I quickly kind of knew more about computers than my parents, especially how to hide what I'm doing so that I can do things I probably shouldn't be doing. And so internet in those times was much more of a Wild West kind of type, because then when you were like into chat rooms, links were going around. So I think I saw my first beheading video when I was 8 years old. And not because I was looking for it. It was like in the past there was this I don't even know how to call it, but it was kind of a prank to send someone a link to something really disturbing, and that was either like some really messed up porn videos or some violence videos or something like that. And you didn't know what you were going to click on until you did it. And then, like I said, very young for the first beheading video. Now, even with all of the messed up things, and I also quickly started playing video games, and I really ignored what the recommended age for a game is. And luckily, my parents really didn't understand much about technology, so I could download and play just about whatever, just making sure that if there was something too graphic, I would wait for my mom to leave my room, for example. And like I did play some really violent games at ages where I probably shouldn't be playing them. At the end, I wouldn't really say it made it easier to like experience or see violence in the real world. I would even say it made me empathetic more, because like I always knew when I was playing a game, even if I was shooting someone, I knew it's a game. It's not something I would ever want to do in the real world. And like when I had conversations with other friends who were playing games, like some of the sweetest people I know in my life played the most violent games, and like just seeing them play that and like I don't know, smashing someone's head on a toilet or something in a game, and then they stopped playing, and then they were like just completely loving and calm and peaceful and everything. So I think there is a like if you know that you're playing a game and that is part of the game, and it could be more violent than something that you would ever want to experience, I wouldn't really say that it makes like real violence any more appealing or easier to witness. So for example, right now with the war in Ukraine, like I had nightmares for the first few days because I was doom scrolling and really looking at what's happening. So through all of the violent games I played and all of the army games I played and like shooter games I played, I would think that this would be like a breeze, right? Just seeing people get shot up. I mean, I used to do that every single day through various video games. But still, like I said, I had nightmares, and I had to like stop following the news just because it was too real and too much. And I think that's the reaction that the majority of gamers would have, even though they might play something violent in the real world or something different. But again, on the other hand, the media really likes to blame like mass shooters on, they were a mass shooter because they were playing this video game, which again hasn't really been linked to any real cases yet.
That was a powerful personal story.
Alright, so this will probably be our last question. What do you guys think was the hallmark game of each generation? Hard question, I know.
I couldn't claim to be an expert at all on other generations.
Well, I guess then what do you think was the hallmark game of your generation?
I can speak, I guess, of my generation a little bit, and take this with a huge grain of salt. I grew up in rural Colorado, so my exposure to normal was pretty small, right? Small sample size, but my school had a class of 13. So, again, grain of salt, rock of salt. But I remember when my best friend got a PlayStation and a Nintendo 64. And I remember when I got a computer. And The Legend of Zelda was unlike any game I'd ever experienced. For those of you, this one I will spoil because frankly, if you haven't played it by now, But there's a moment when you begin as a young character and you suddenly grow up, and that wasn't, it's after a long time playing the game, and that was pretty insane to be like, well, this, it's unlike anything I'd ever seen where a character can have that much change. And then for me on a computer, I also became very computer literate long before my parents. But my device of choice was The Sims, which had a huge impact on who I am today, also as a storyteller. Having 13 people in your grade growing up, and being a little bit of an outcast, was quite lonely. And playing The Sims, I was able to create stories and characters with whole backgrounds. And it absolutely had an impact on who I am, because I could create entire scenes and entire worlds. So for me, I would say The Sims, and then certainly every single Nintendo 64 game, but especially I think for my generation, millennial generation, Zelda.
I feel like I can sense a trend between parents not being as computer literate and the interest in gaming. So perhaps I'll use that as my crutch to explain why I'm not as much of a gamer as Emma or Jemmy, with the fact that I grew up in the engineering labs at Cornell University, where my dad had one of the first generation Macintoshes and taught me how to code in Fortran. So I'll use that as my excuse. With that said, I do think that probably the game defining my generation, not so much me, really is Halo, right? From Xbox. Like I just hear among engineering friends how they still have a ton of leads. It's the game of choice when they get together and play social games. With that said, I was also super excited to hear Xbox's newest announcement, so kudos to you all, about how some of the older generation games can now be purchased as experiences from Xbox Live. So I thought that was a cool announcement.
For us, I guess it was World of Warcraft, because that was something that really sucked us all in. And then a bit later, RuneScape. I don't know how popular that is here. And then on the side, either Halo, completely agree, or like the first Call of Duty games.
Awesome. Well, I guess we'll end it a little bit early. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to our great panelists. Give them a round of applause, please.